The Western Bulldogs have been ravaged by injury throughout the start of the season and have recovered beautifully. Their last 4 games have been at 4 different venues, and the last 3 were big wins over decent opposition. And now they find themselves back in the 8 and propelling themselves towards another finals campaign. Just how far can the way the Bulldogs are playing take them? And outside all of the intro stuff, if you will, you've got the Jamarra Ugle-Hagan, the Sam Darcy stuff, you've got the Bailey Smith stuff, if you want to count that as something, which I'm not really wanting to do, but it can be out there as a thing. If we want it to be, that's perfectly fine. But all in all, it has to be something of note what the Bulldogs have done, and I think a really good note as well. They have been extraordinarily good, and I think it's time they get talked about, and it's kind of weird because sometimes you just get underrated teams in the competition. Not every outlet can talk about all 18 teams evenly. That's more than fair, maybe a little unfair in terms of which states of the country get talked about more than others, but it's kind of funny now because the focus is shifting to, are the Dogs underrated? Yes, and then they move on with the conversation. No one's really talking about why. Well, that's why I'm here. So let's go through and talk about 25 so far. So they're currently sitting at 5-3 with a percentage of 127, which is more than handy. They're 6th on the ladder at this point in time. And if we're being honest, the Collingwood and Fremantle games are really the ones that got away. It was just a kick against the Pies, and the whistleblowers kind of screwed them over on that one. And it wasn't as bad as it looked against the Dockers, to be perfectly honest. A 16-point loss. It was earlier on in the year with more troops out. That was, to be honest, probably only their second worst performance of the season so far, and it hasn't really been that bad when you think of their third loss being the game against the Lions, where they were up by 38 odd points, and then the Brisbane Lions just overran them in the end. Their 3 L's are not really that bad. And of course, I know it's easy to do now, but if they get over the line in even 2 of those performances, then you're looking at a side that is not only ingrained in the top 4, but probably number 2 or 3 on everyone's power ranking list. Brisbane and Collingwood are probably going to be number 1 and number 2 consistently. How much you rank a side like Hawthorn, for example, Gold Coast, is going to remain to be seen. The Bulldogs deserve to be in that conversation and arguably should or could be ahead of both of those sides. Recency bias may have people knocking Gold Coast a little bit, and whatever you think about the Hawks with a couple of soft kills is completely up to you, but the Bulldogs more than truly deserve to be in that conversation. And their wins have been really good as well, remembering that North Melbourne game was a genuine danger one. This wasn't a case of they only beat North. Carlton, St Kilda, GWS, and Port. Now, it's fair to say that none of those teams are really seen as prelim final locks. In fact, out of all of them, there's an argument to be made that only GWS have prelim final potential, but the Bulldogs don't run the fixture. So what do you want them to do? Yes, they've played, as I said, Brisbane. They've played Collingwood. Yes, there are going to be Gold Coast, Hawthorn, these kind of teams that they're going to come up against. But in terms of what they've delivered on and the players they've had out, 5-3 is an extraordinary result. And when you've had to deal with these kinds of injuries or missing players, to be perfectly honest, that's where the credit not only has to go to the players on the field themselves, but of course the credit has to go to Bevo as well. I, amongst others, but they can be accountable for their own opinions, have stated on numerous occasions that Bevo at the Bulldogs was starting to not make sense anymore as the transition period was coming in. I am firmly happy to say that it looks like I am really wrong about that. Now, again, what their ceiling is going to be decided probably before the bye, to be perfectly honest, to see where they're at. And we're actually going to see how much versatility this side has actually got. More about that a little bit later. But at this point in time, you have to tip the cap. And that's kind of what's annoying about mainstream media at the moment, is that if you're wrong or it looks like one of your opinions is not aging that badly, not many are going to go, we may have to have a rethink about this. It's actually incredibly easy to have a rethink. The more information you have, the easier it is to sort of flex your opinion, I think, or make your opinion more flexible, I should say. And my opinion, very simply, is that I was wrong that the Bulldogs should have got rid of Bevo. It's as simple as that. They should not get rid of him. At this point in time, there's no evidence to suggest that should be the case, and it would take a genuine disaster from here in order for that to be done. And I am more than happy to go out on the limb, if you will, and say that Luke Beveridge is not only going to be the coach of the Bulldogs for the next year or two, he's the coach of the year right now. I'm really impressed with Brisbane, of course. Chris Fagan having the reigning premier be as good as they are, as good as Brisbane are. That's fantastic. Not going to take that away from him or Brisbane for a moment. Yes, Craig McRae is taking a team that, yes, did come off a flag but didn't play finals last year back to a contention spot. No one's had to deal with what Bevo has at the moment. He right now is the best coach in it in terms of, from a coach of the year perspective, in terms of where he would sit on kind of a power rankings. That, again, is going to be completely up to you. You've still got the likes of Chris Scott, Craig McRae, Chris Fagan, but Bevo is, of course, one of the only coaches in the league right now that does not only have a contending list, but also has the benefit of going to another level. Yes, it does look like Brisbane might be able to go to another level, but are we as confident that a Collingwood, Hawthorn, Gold Coast, these kinds of teams can go to another level? We're not sure, but we haven't seen the Bulldogs at their best yet, and that's the most frightening thing about them. And it all clicked at Mars Stadium, Ballarat, God's country, you could say. What a performance that was. So just how much did the Bulldogs take the piss in this game? Well, if you'll indulge me for a second, disposals were plus 110. Gained, they had more than a kilometre of meters gained, which is extraordinary. Inside 50s, they were plus 26. Marks, they were plus 30. Scoring from stoppage, they were plus 57. Scores from turnover, plus 27. And scoring from the forward half, they were plus 66. 11 more goals from the forward half. Jesus. I mean, part of that also is Port Adelaide. Holy crap, that was bad. But overall, that is the epitome of taking the piss. And it reflected in the player ratings as well. Not only did Port Adelaide only have 2 of the 10 highest rated players on the ground, they only had 1 of the top 9. And when you look at the players on that list, it kind of makes you go, yeah, that's how you win a game by 15 goals. Ed Richards, Tim English, and how good is it that he is back in form, by the way. Riley West, underrated season. Joel Frazier, Aaron Norton, Rory Lobb, Adam Treloar, and of course, the Bont. I am more than happy to say that my opinion on the Bont is both kind of polar opposites, and I believe them strongly, is that he is the best player in the competition. He is number 1 for me. I'm not saying you're wrong if you pick someone else, but Marcus Bontempelli for me is the best player in the league. I still think Tom Liberatore should be captain. 2 things can be true at once, and I'm not saying Bont is a bad captain, but I'm fully invested in the Libra as a leader kind of storyline, I think. Now, of course, I'm not going to be one that's going to be angry that the Bont is captain for any reason. That's not going to be the case in the slightest. But I'm fully on board what Libba does as the spiritual leader of this footy club, which you could also argue he does even while Marcus has got the C next to his name. That's fine. But what I do know is that in the past, when the Bulldogs have gone no good, he is probably the only captain in the competition that I've never seen questioned. And I think that's part of the frustration that comes about it. Even someone like Connor Rozee, for example, even after this game, and I've done this, is I've questioned whether Port have got the right leadership with him and those around him. That's never happened at the Bulldogs. And by the way, that's not a superstar thing. Superstar players have had their leadership questioned constantly, and it's not happened for the Bont. And I think that's more frustrating than a simple case of me trying to get him sacked from his position. That's not where I stand at all. So as long as we're clear on that, we're golden. And what was really impressive about that Port Adelaide game was their work between the arcs. But don't let me tell you that. Let's let the numbers say that. Now, according to AFL player ratings, the Bulldogs are actually the number 1 team in the comp, which I find really interesting. Now, AFL player ratings are not perfect. They are more of a guide rather than fact. There is a science and an art to it rather than, again, like I said, outright fact. Yes, 1 + 1 = 2. That is a fact. Whereas AFL player ratings, yeah, we don't really know where they stand. Like I said, if they can guide you into a conversation, that's awesome. But treating it as out-and-out gospel is a little bit silly for mine. But does that mean they don't deserve to be in the conversation as one of the best teams in the competition? Of course not. They absolutely are one of the best teams in it. But there are more numbers to talk about with the Dogs, and these are facts in terms of what they're doing with the footy, what they're doing post-possession, and of course their territory games. So let's start with possession. They're the best team in the competition at forward 50 ground ball. They're the best team in the competition in conceding turnovers. They're not giving the ball back. They're number 2 in contested and ground ball, number 3 in uncontested ball and loose ball gets, and they are the 4th best team in the competition in hard ball gets. When there is a footy to be won, they are showing their A+ grade ability to not only win the ball in the contest, but retain the footy. Winning a clearance is great. If you turn the ball over from your clearance, well, you're just giving the opposition a chance to set up the ground from the half-back line. Like, that would make no sense. If we use a Bulldogs player as an example, let's say it's Ed Richards. Ed Richards winning a clearance is amazing, but if he's delivering the ball inside 50 uncontested to, say, Asava Radagalia, for example, and he goes laterally to Kane Farrell and Port Adelaide rebound from there, then Ed Richards' clearance goes to his name. That helps. Pointless in terms of what the Dogs would be able to do. That is not what is happening. But the fact that they've got a balance between their contested and uncontested ball, particularly between the arcs, means that not only are they retaining the footy really well, but they are able to set up scoring chains in a really big way. From possession load, let's go to territory before we get to the impressive scoring numbers just for a second to sort of further emphasize what I mean. They're first in the comp for inside 50s. From taking the ball from defensive 50 to forward 50, they're number one in the competition. Time in forward half is second. They're third for handball receives, turning defensive half chains into scoring. They're fourth, and then the fourth best team in the competition for meters gained. Now, what's really interesting about this is that after round 2, the Bulldogs were bottom 6 in the league for meters gained. It was something they struggled with a little bit against North, and it's something they struggled with a little bit against Freo, particularly in a couple of quarters. Might have been the second and third one from memory, but I haven't gone back and watched that game, so if they're not the correct quarters, don't shoot me for it. But effectively, they're able to win the ball at stoppage, no matter where it is, but also no matter where they're picking up the footy, they're able to score from it. Now, what's really interesting about this is that from defensive 50 to forward 50, they are scoring, which is really good, because they're actually not a great rebounding 50 team. Their rebound 50 rate is about average for the competition. In fact, I think they're 10th at the time of recording. The fact that they're not really rebounding the ball all that well also says a couple of things. One, they're not conceding a whole lot of inside 50s, by the way. But also, secondly, they're making them count. It's kind of one of those, you may not have a lot of touches, but make them count, right? It's not the moments that, you don't count your moments, you make your moments count. And what's interesting about this is, again, it's kind of like that guy who has 35 disposals but 110 meters gained versus the guy that can have 18 disposals and kick 3. So if you can have that balance, you're still going to need both of them in your team in order to, win, but you can't have one without the other. So, for example, Libba, who would be the closest to an accumulator, now he's more damaging than the example that I just gave before, but Libba needs the Bont and Ed Richards. And by the way, the Bont and Ed Richards need Libba. So all of them work in tandem beautifully. Or it's clearly going to be Joel Frazier. Or if you want a bigger body in there, James Harms for even a centre bounce or two. Doesn't have to be a lot of them. And he kicked 4 against the Giants, did chompers. So it's not as if that's his only position and he's being wasted. He's absolutely not. But they're able to now add layers to their CBAs. The Bont in the elimination final last year just had too much time forward, especially in the last quarter, and it made no sense. What they're able to do now, the Bulldogs, is that can make a little bit more sense because the Bont's not knackered because he's not playing 80%, 90% midfield time. He can play out of the square or he can have a break because you've got Frazier, Sanders, Matt Kennedy, these guys that are going in there, who, by the way, would be another contender for the contested ball gathering kind of player. And of course, being able to convert that into scores is going to be the most important thing. Like I said, they haven't had Cody Waitman. They haven't had Jamarra Ugle-Hagan. They're now not going to have Sam Darcy. So you would be forgiven for thinking that Aaron Norton, Rory Lobb, and Riley West as your big 3, I suppose, up forward would give you doubt. But that's actually not the case. Riley West is an incredibly underrated player. Rory Lobb just needs to play a role. And as we said, Norton just needed to step up. And he's clearly doing that. He and Darcy haven't worked it out yet in terms of synergy and chemistry because Norton kind of is your contested marking player. That's also what Darcy is. Norton is a lead-up player, but so is Darcy. It's kind of a weird Pokemon evolution thing, is that Sam Darcy is Aaron Norton. He's just taller, more skilled, better on the lead, and better in the air. And Norton's already good at those things. You could argue that Norton is a B+, A- kind of guy at this. Sam Darcy's just A+. And that can kind of cause a little bit of an identity crisis. Whilst Darcy's out, Norton being able to take that role and run with it is clearly going to do him the world of good. We're also forgetting the fact that Latham Vandermeer would have been a lock for All-Australian if they stopped doing it at round 4. His numbers were never going to be what they are, but you've also got guys like Josh Dolan, Lockie McNeil, I think is his name, number 30. I don't know why I've just blanked on that. But you've also got these smaller guys that are just going to effectively get in the way. And getting in the way works because if you're able to retain the ball inside 50, you are going to score. And that retention And the way that they're attacking the contest, the way they're able to transition, handball receive, win the hard ball, win the uncontested ball, I nearly said softball then, that would have sounded weird, is resulting in these kind of scoring numbers. They're second in goals, second in goal assists, they're the second most accurate team, they're launching scores the second most times, and they're scoring the fifth most goals inside 50. The other damning number here is that the Bulldogs' opposition are also not getting a lot of rebound 50s and not getting a lot of meters gained in their back half either. It was a point of trouble for Port Adelaide, even when they had the wind in the first and third quarters. It was something that after St Kilda had kicked 4 of the first 5 3 weeks ago, they couldn't really do either. The Giants had a little bit more ease there in the first half, first 2.5 quarters, I suppose. But once the Bulldogs flicked the switch, good luck. Lockie Ash, Lockie Whitfield, they had good numbers. They had very little impact. It almost looks like the Bulldogs are toying with their opponents, and they're not actually doing that. But what's so fascinating to see, kind of the psyche of the way that the Bulldogs are playing their football at the moment, is that it's not going to click from the first bounce. And it's up to the opposition to make sure it doesn't click at all, or it fails to click late. Kind of like what the Hawks did in the elimination final, what Brisbane did in the comeback win especially. And there are not going to be too many sides in the competition that are going to be able to do that. This is very much a football club and a side whose fate is in their own hands more than anything else. It's very clear that this is not a team that is going to beat themselves. And your midfield better be on their game. Because again, remember, the Bont's been injured. Adam Treloar has been injured. Yet from a clearance point of view, they're first in centre clearance, second in total clearance, third in stoppage clearances, and they're the fourth best team in the competition for getting first possession. And it doesn't really matter who's around the ball stoppage-wise because it's leading to even more scoring chains. They are the best team in the competition from scoring from stoppage and centre bounce. They're the second most effective team scoring in the forward half. They're the second most effective transition chaining team in the competition, and they're even fifth for kick-ins. So shout out Bailey Dale, I suppose, who's taking a lot of kick-ins there. All in all, this is a football club that can no longer go under the radar in terms of analysis. But are they the perfect product? Or are they even the end product of what they want to achieve? Not really. And it does seemingly come down to how good their backline can stand up. Now, James O'Donnell's been awesome this year. I suspect if Darcy's able to come back, Lobb will go back, which will help a little bit. Like I said, their rebounding game is relatively okay, but where it could fall apart for the Bulldogs is that if you do hit a final and you've got a team that is able to somewhat match them in the midfield, think of a team like Collingwood, for example, or of course Brisbane, who have got Neil, the Ashcrofts, probably more Will than Levi, to be honest, McCluggage, Dunkley. They on paper could probably go up against the Bulldogs. So if it was a qualifying final or a prelim final, are the Bulldogs going to be able to stand up against a full force front half attack? Maybe not, but still, if Brisbane are going to be your hardest way to a flag, there are probably 15 other teams in the competition that would happily take that in terms of where they would like to be in 25 so far. Again, I know they've lost to the two best teams in the competition. They were in both of those games up to their eyeballs, and with 16 home and away games to go, they're in a pretty good place. And they've got a semi-decent run before the bye with Gold Coast, Essendon, and Geelong before they get their week off. If they can come out of that with a 2-1 record and end up at the bye with a 7-4 record, I'll call it, they'll finish top 4. But that's what I think about the Bulldogs, guys. Comment below, let me know. Like the video if you like the video. Subscribe to join the Daz Talks Footy family. Nearly at 5,400, trying to hit 5,500 before round 10 begins. I need your help doing that, so please go ahead and do that. That would be amazing. I hope you enjoyed the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one as we build up towards round 9. Thanks again.